ladies and gentlemen, right now for the next 30 minutes, there's going to be a very interesting cloud and data AI fireside chat. When we're looking on the topic powering cloud computing with AI, the dynamic duo, we're looking at talking on topics like AI infrastructure of cloud computing, benefits of leveraging AI in cloud computing, powering a self-managing cloud with AI, improving data management with AI, and AI and SaaS integration. Well, this and much more is going to happen in the fireside chat with our speakers, our eminent speakers. First up, Badar Khan, Director of Digital Mobility, NEOM, Saudi Arabia. Well, Badar, being the Director of Digital Mobility at NEOM, is shaping the world's first integrated smart mobility platform to be operated in NEOM. With over 15 years of experience in leadership roles at both Fortune 100 companies and startups, Badar is somebody who's designed digitization strategy and led global engineering teams to guide the smart city and industrial transformations. Also, we're joined by Sanjeev Madavi, the Chief Digital Transformation Officer, Khimji Ramdas, LLC, Oman. Well, Sanjeev, a seasoned IT executive with 23 years of global experience in digital transformation, value chain innovation, new business ventures, and operational excellence across multiple industries in the supply chain and logistics. Sanjeev uses his global leadership experience in process management, process improvement, project management, technology roadmaps, enterprise solutions delivery, and business entrepreneurship to deliver a positive impact to the bottom line. Well, ladies and gentlemen, with this, it is time, as you can see on your stage and screen, to welcome Sanjeev and Badar to the World Cloud Show. Have a great time, gentlemen, and thank you for joining us. With this, I'd now like to pass it on to the next 30 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Bhavna. Really happy to be here again. A warm welcome to, of course, Badar and, of course, the audience. As Bhavna mentioned, we have a very interesting topic at hand today. It's about AI and cloud computing and whether they are really complementary, in order to augment each other. As I'm sure all of us have already gone through a lot of details about it, I'm just trying to dive straight into the topic, AI in cloud computing. So where are we trying to look at a merger between the two, and how do you think it really happens? So in my opinion, I think we're looking at AI cloud computing being the merger of the machine learning capabilities of AI with the cloud-based computing environment, making something as an intuitive, more connected experience. We already have digital assistants like Siri and Amazon Alexa and Google Home, which offer us kind of a seamless flow of AI technology and cloud computing resources together, so that people can make purchases, or they can adjust their smart thermostats, or listen to their favorite song instantly. But however, we feel that this is just the tip of the iceberg, because again, huge steps are being made in AI, along with the cloud computing improvements as well. And these are changes that are now setting up a stage for more efficiency, more flexibility, and a strategic insight into how we think things will pan out in the future. If you look at the basic elements, artificial intelligence tools today are used to deliver a very different cloud computing experience. If you take the example of Salesforce, they've recently added a service on their platform called as Einstein. Now, this tool actually offers the ability to capture customer data and turn it into meaningful customer relationship insights and patterns. So the whole idea here is that you're trying to create some kind of an insight for the customers through a cloud model and try to use AI towards enhancing their capabilities as well as their decision support. If you look at the market, a statista which I think recently arranged for some statistics on this, the global value of the AI market is supposed to surpass more than $89 billion by 2025, and a significant chunk of that, I think, can be attributed to powering cloud computing. And I presume this is where cloud computing then becomes an engine to increase the scope and impact of how AI can sort of make its inroads into the larger market. In fact, McKinsey also recently conducted a study to explore how AI would impact value creation in a range of industries. And they realized that the estimates are 19 different business areas, more than 400 potential use cases. AI could almost create 3.5 trillion to 5.8 trillion per year in value. But again, we are looking at how this is compared with Deloitte, who again has a different point of view. Deloitte is saying that we're looking at an analysis in which AI has tremendous capabilities to benefit companies, the need for technical talent and massive infrastructure, which is obviously now attainable thanks to the cloud computing environment. So the upshot is that the innovators are making it simple. They're making it easier for companies to benefit from AI technology. And at the same time, we are also in huge need for top technical talent. We need access to huge data sets and massive computing power. And this is where exactly I feel cloud services may be able to address their shortfalls with the help of AI. So at this point of time, let me try to bring in our guest speaker, Mr. Badar Khan today. Badar, as a starting point, I would like to hear your opening remarks on how you see AI playing a strong role in computing, and especially in areas related to infrastructure, data management, and integration.
No, thank you, Sanjeev. Pleasure to be here on the stage on the World Cloud show here. And thanks for the question. I think this is a very important and huge topic to kind of address in 30 minutes, but we'll try to give it a shot in regards to trying to hit the important points there, right? So you kind of laid down the importance on why cloud and cloud infrastructure and also cloud services are important, where the direction of the industry is also going to leverage these type of technologies to make sure to kind of reduce costs. There's a certain cost savings that comes with it. But when you talk about the maintenance aspects of holding infrastructure, but then there is the other aspect of changing focus to, instead of infrastructure and building and recreating IT systems, to then moving into services that you're actually concerned about and building towards, right? So really shifting that concern. And I think where I would say the larger space of AI, if you look where a lot of people are looking at machine learning, but I think if you look at the larger, because AI for me is a combination of tool sets where, if you're looking for certain patterns, machine learning might be a good approach. If you're looking for genetic, optimization, there's other evolution AI algorithms that might be better suited. So how do we bring that type of tool set to I would say to the cloud in terms of the compute resources that it has, then bridge that to say, well, what type of problem are we trying to solve? And I really like to promote more of that purpose-driven services rather than just having services just for the sake of services, or the approach that we used to do 5 years ago was, let's try to capture all of the data because data is the new oil, to then see what insights we can glean, right? And there's certain costs that we underestimate when we take that approach to say, well, we gathered all this data, maybe 80% of it is not useful, and we're using 20% of it for our application. And as you mentioned, we're kind of just skimming the surface of using these AI engines. Is why not use more of a structured approach to say, okay, well, these sensors and these devices are generating data, they're being used for certain purposes. Let's look at the problems that need to be solved and then try to develop solutions and better leverage cloud services. So what you get from that is focused toolings in regard to the cloud services, and not just general tooling services, which is important, but really if you make it tailored to there's a service tool that you have that can solve these particular problems, then it becomes easy to use them. Because a lot of times we have all these tools, but there's no, strategy for integration. How do I utilize them to solve my specific problems? And that's a cyclic thing that always happens, and we repeat certain activities there, right? So I think where AI can come in is to say, well, start looking at that landscape. Let's start with the infrastructure, where Google's kind of went in and said, well, I have these massive data centers where I'm using to power my search engines. Can I now use the AI engines that I've developed on those data centers to then further optimize them, right? So they develop a cooling system using AI to understand what are the cooling needs and do that distribution, and we're able to save about 40% of their bill because of that type of AI optimization that they leverage. And then using more of like when you're talking about data management and I would say infrastructure management, is to say, okay, well, how much of automation can I put into those data centers to then help to automate and achieve better resiliency and availability that I'm promising to the customer. So what you're doing is basically saying, okay, well, you're not just providing a tool set, but then you're also saying, okay, here's how you leverage those tool sets to then solve your particular problems, right? So it's really that, for me, the shift from just general purpose services to now let's start to focus on services that, help users to integrate them and build and concentrate on services that they really want to address for their customer base, right? So it's that shift in mindset is where I think where as an industry we need to kind of go towards it to say, well, we have all these tool sets. How do we help now customers use those engines and categorizing them in some way?
Sure, thanks, Badar. I think from my perspective as well, I think we're looking at some of the very basic aspects, in terms of actually managing the cloud itself. And that is again where AI can sort of monitor some of the core workflows, see how exactly business IT teams are functioning, where they can focus more in terms of strategic activities vis-a-vis high value areas of operations. We're also trying to look at efficiency improvements that can be brought in through AI. And again, I'm sure most of these are very standard expected use cases that people are looking at. In fact, processing data again is another strong area, because as you can see, cloud computing, while deploying large data repositories, can actually use AI and try to streamline the ways people are trying to search for data or manage, update, and consume data. And this is again something which can really make life easier for most of the customers from a cloud environment. Not only that, we are also looking at some kind of a dynamic relationship between the two, because we're looking at a rapid transformation that is resulting from the merger of AI and cloud computing. So far, we've always had established approaches to how AI can be used, and now there is also the chance that cloud computing is also coming to the rescue of AI in some form and shape, because AI applications have been historically very high performance oriented, run on multiple and fast GPUs, and obviously these makes them very exorbitant in terms of pricing. So in terms of trying to look at now AI as a service in cloud applications, this could actually make it more accessible to businesses. It could even get the price point lowering to an extent where now the masses can start reaping the benefits of AI if it is available on a cloud computing environment. Thank you, Badar, for that interesting insight. I think now just moving very quickly into the next immediate, I would say, challenge that we try to portray. Now that we know AI and cloud computing are definitely hand in hand, how do you see the principal benefits that are coming out of this joint relationship going ahead?
A joint relationship between AI and cloud services?
That's right.
I think there's a close relationship, right? Because that whole shift to say, well, can we outsource or bring compute and data services more closer and general purposes where you're not kind of now constrained to scale problems, right? So really, cloud came in to say, okay, well, can I provide services where I can provide flexibility for the customer to use compute resources as needed and data storage units as needed, and then also solve the scale problem, right? Because we were starting to have our on-premise solutions, and then when you started to get to those data thresholds, when you talk about compute and data storage, we then said, okay, well, how do we now scale? And typically that scaling was difficult because we didn't have mechanisms to do horizontal or vertical scaling, right? Because it then required hardware upgrades, but then also what was your virtualization strategy to then say, okay, well, how do I take this virtual instance and then duplicate that? What's those things? Cloud came in and solved those problems and said, here's mechanisms to be able to scale. Initially with unmanaged services and then slowly moving to more managed services, right? So when we talk about enabling things where we don't have to define already the compute resources that we require, but rather just spinning them up as required. So that's kind of where a lot of that power came in. The next step is to say, well, how can I leverage the AI engines? Not only because there is two approaches to that. One is from a data-centric approach, the data center approach when you're talking about infrastructure and all that aspect. And I think here we probably, if we're talking about how the end customer can benefit from using these AI engines, is more the application services enhancements that you have. Because what you've now done is instead of now buying and saturating the market and saying, okay, well, you need an NVIDIA chip or AMD chip to do your GPU processing. And then you have, a big storm in the market, and then there's, the supply and demand issues there. So how can we bring those now next level of services that AI engines require, so that everyone, and it goes back to your point where, making it available not just for businesses, but also for the masses to be able to create applications. And this really goes along the lines of, if you think about how the App Store, when you talk about the Apple App Store or even the Google Play Store, has transformed in regard to making applications and being able to develop applications and put it into the hands of your end users more accessible, is then the question is, can cloud also follow those models on a more larger scale? Because you're really looking at industry level problems, e-commerce, larger scale problems, to say, well, can we make those services common and then be able to help our users build and integrate them together to then leverage AI? Because a lot of times we talk about an AI engine, let's just say for e-commerce, right? And it's, if you look under the hood, it's a statistical model that, they have very basic logical loops to say, okay, here's the enhancement. Well, and not really clearly leveraging data that they're kind of generating, because there is aspects of, you have to monitor that data to then be able to use that data and then respond to it. And Amazon's kind of showed how they can do that more efficiently. But then also having strategies to say, well, what happens when this particular service goes down, and having more of a fallback strategy. And that's kind of where a lot of this common and resilient and availability aspects come to play, where the cloud and cloud services can say, well, we're already addressing that for you today, right, with our services. And now all you have to do is, instead of thinking about a degradation strategy or, what happens if these services go down, it's really, I will assume that these services are there, and if they degrade, it's just more, a lesser, I would say, personalization that we expect from the services that we have, right? So and that's expected when you talk about service degradation. So it's really about to kind of tie that together, is bringing together the AI engines as services, where then it can be consumed just like you develop applications. We were talking about the iOS app stores. If we talk about low code, where we've moved from really C++ to then to more of like, higher level Python type of languages, to now a big push to low code, where you're really not going into the intricacies of HTML or JavaScript. You're really just going into, how do I lay down this page and then create the information logic to then power my application, but then taking that to the next service and saying, well, if you created an information logic, can you now use that with some sort of AI service that I have to kind of complete that loop of the personalization aspect, right? So it's really bringing those things together as common services from the cloud. But the important point is that integration, right? How do you do that integration? How do you bring those services where it's more intuitive? Because these are complex algorithms that we're kind of exposing and bringing together and putting it into the hands of the users.
Sure. Thanks again, Badar. I think, again, while you rightly touch upon some of the aspects that can be brought forward, I think this whole concept of AI as a service, which could also emerge going forward, I think it's going to be another fundamental game changer, because we see that is one way for a lot of people to be able to consume AI, for a matter of a monthly fee, instead of trying to look at having a lot of capital expenditure flowing into it. So I really see that this is a strong way for us to look at the productivity increase, looking at harnessing big data qualities, and the other aspects that can really be at the moment a challenge within the cloud computing environment. If I may also try to look at the next challenge, and now that we have established the relationship between AI and cloud computing, and we've also talked about the benefits of the duo, now coming to the more significant question. If I were to make a statement looking at powering self-managing cloud with AI, what would be your thoughts? Would you agree or disagree, and why? Obviously, sort of slating that AI is now dominant in this relationship. What are your thoughts on that?
No, that's a very good question. I'll probably bring that down one more level, just because there's the AI engines and services. We talked about that. And for me, the question maybe should be more of how do we now provide more security and privacy, right? Because now you're exposing that data, you're sharing information that should be, from a consent perspective, in line with what your users and your stakeholders would expect, right? So kind of taking that one layer below, it's then really talking about, we talked about bringing general AI services. We talked about bringing compute resources and data resources together. But then how do we now talk about data obfuscation, where we talk about information flows, but how do we abstract the privacy or the metadata from your data group to say, well, let's not relate it to a particular individual, but use it as a general consensus. And then it's talking about how do you now do stuff on the edge. So when you're talking about your local data storage, and this goes into a lot of the concepts around what the previous speaker talked about, was around hybrid cloud, is what do you put onto the edge to say, these are actual services that is important to me with regards to the data, and I need to kind of have ownership and give that ownership to the end users, but then still be able to extract metadata that doesn't tie in their particular, I would say, personalizations to then create models, right? Because the models are generated by bringing together large amounts of data to then say, okay, well, here's certain decision matrices that you can come up with that helps us to make a recommendation system, or even if you're talking about more of a genetic computing type of algorithm to say, an optimization aspect. So they start to generalize the data. What are those layers that as a cloud provider that I can provide, where you give those edge devices to say, we'll do the edge data processing for you, but then glean the information that then helps you to power the general model, right? And those kinds of concepts, and it's much it's harder, it's easier said than done, because there's a lot of complexities when you're talking about multi-model approaches, and it's really going toward that multi-model to say, well, let's not create a full model of the universe in a single snapshot, but let's create multi-models to say, I need certain information that then powers another set of models. And that then helps to kind of alleviate the privacy issues, because as you go up the model framework, you're actually generalizing data, right? Because you're now not able, because you have a lot of data points coming together, that you're not able to make that traceability back to say, hey, this is a personal attribute of this person A, right? Or entity A. So what are those frameworks when you're talking about enabling cloud with the AI engines, that you can come up from a framework perspective that then helps this more layered approach, rather than a singular approach of, let's create this large data lake and then power some sort of model with that. And by the way, I'm going to be having multiple models because there are certain decisions that are independent to make those next decisions, right? So I think it's really like now going one layer down and saying, how do I break down? We understand how AI engines work. How do we now break those apart, where we can now separate concerns with regards to, these are local concerns versus global concerns of the system.
No, I think that's a very, very well put point, Badar. I think I fully agree with you, because again, of the many facets of AI that we keep talking about, whether it's text analytics or machine language translation, speech and vision, I think it's the machine learning aspect, I think, which everyone is now sort of looking forward to in terms of using that actively on the cloud. But as you rightly said, there are two facets to the story. One is using the ML capabilities to sort of enhance the cloud computing environment itself and trying to make it run better and more efficient all the time. And you can also use ML towards large sets of data that you might want to model, as well as try to analyze, to try to bring out some insights which might be customer facing or an external facing environment as well. What I'm also very curious to understand, I think, is that while we were addressing the point about the data amalgamation, the efficiencies that are within, you rightly touch upon a very point. That is about the aspect of security versus better customer engagement. And these are sometimes sort of dichotomous in nature. They don't really go hand in hand, because some way we are trying to keep things safe, and on the other hand, we're trying to keep things as open and free as possible. How do you see the role of AI in trying to look at both these aspects? One, in terms of enhancing the security of data, and on the other hand, trying to make a better customer engagement that can result from the new relationship.
Yeah, if I had the answer for this one, I think I would probably just solve everybody's problem today, right? So I think it's more talking about what is trust me, right? So really getting into that definition, and this goes into more of the area of AI ethics and how do you say what is wrong versus what is right, and because you're kind of just doing a general AI pool, and this is goes into more of the psychological science of digitalization, right? To say, how do I bring in, when we're talking about the AI ethics and the privacy, what is right, what is wrong, what is that common consensus, right? And it's more, for me, more of a discussion to be had with regard to those topics, to say, how do we determine that, to then better point and trigger those AI engines to make decisions that align with our values, because frankly speaking, values change over the evolution of humankind, right? So how do you keep up with that evolution? And even if I talk about a simple product, let's say today you might be interested in TVs, electronics because of COVID, and you're staying at home, and your values are more towards spending towards those things rather than a car or a vehicle. But tomorrow it might be where you're now looking for the next car because now you're past the pandemic phase, right? So your value regards, and it's a very simple example, and I'm kind of really boiling it down to not go to the core problems, to say, today your value was that, and the next time your value was something else. So how do you kind of build these, I would say it's more of a dialogue to then govern and help to set the direction when it comes to the ethics sides of what is right, what is wrong, and trust, right? Really about, because the users need to be able to say, okay, well, it's making certain decisions for me. Does it align with my values? Second, does it also kind of get me to the direction that solves my particular problem? Because we're there to we use these platforms to solve or go for a particular purpose, right? So if I'm going to use an Uber app, the purpose of using an Uber app is to get somewhere, right? So if that aspect starts to degrade and it's going to other areas where I'm like, well, that's not the intent of where I use this particular application. And this is where, it gets a bit more fuzzy than, where you can have where concrete ideas, but it's, like I said, more of a dialogue, trust what our data, and then you have this system of catalyzing the systems that, data that is important, maybe from a governmental perspective or a citizen perspective, versus, this is better for the greater good in terms of health, right? So we came together as a global community to then solve problems toward the pandemic. So there was certain data we were willing to give because that solved the greater good, and our values kind of changed in that regard. So it's more of that aspect in it. And I don't think there is a one hammer solution that you can find when you're talking about general cloud services. Rather, I think that needs to then push concerns to say, well, what is the concern of providing general cloud services, right? And what do I need to do there? And then saying, okay, well, what do I leave for the end user to design into their systems, right? So to say there are certain values and concerns, and separating those things a bit out.
Sure, Badar. I think that's a very interesting insight. I completely appreciate the participation that we're having here. As we, I think, almost drawing to the last 5 minutes of our time, may I request your sort of concluding remarks on this? I would really appreciate it in case you can try to give at least 3 pointers to the audience for them to take away from our discussion, or what do you think as the next action plans or steps? Thank you.
No, thank you. So I think there's only one point that I'd probably make. Cloud is a service that's going to be there to come, right? So it's really about the adoption of those cloud services, and then more, how do I integrate more of those services, but yet be able to differentiate between the local concerns that I have when it comes to data privacy and trust versus general services that I want to make. And all organizations should be thinking about is that separation and having those clear guidelines, so that way when you roll out programs that are large, services that you want to give either to a city or through your business, it's then clear as to here's the data and services that I kept separate and local to localization services versus what is more from a global perspective, the purpose that I need to design my service for, right? So those are my end remarks there. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah. Thank you so much again. I think it's definitely a very exciting time for us to explore the potential of AI and its implications on businesses, also in the near distant future. But I think the point of integrating AI technology with cloud computing, it's creating a means for massive amounts of data, streamlining complex processes, or even for that matter, make product or service deliveries become so seamless and they can be fluider than they were before. But the idea remains that artificial intelligence and cloud computing have already begun connecting the smart machines, managing massive amounts of data that we are generating today. Anyways, we have thermostats and smart appliances to self-driving cars. We already have issuing commands to smart devices while we are jogging in the park or wherever we may be, thanks to internet and cloud computing. So for me, the key challenge remains as to how are we trying to now build on this computational ability of machine language, and how we can use that in IoT devices, which will probably gather more and more data. They sort of make your own decisions, without sending data back to the cloud. So that will actually be creating truly intelligent machines that can sort of adjust, the thermostats, based on their own data, without relying back on the cloud-related information, or sort of remind us to pick up the milk on the way back home from work after we see someone else has done it, or at least some older patterns in the past. All in all, I think we all agree that there is a very strong fusion of cloud computing and AI technology that is about to happen or is already in progress, and it's going to bring a very significant change to our technology industry. The way we are looking at the public cloud services providers investing in the growth of AI, they are definitely heading in the right direction, and now they're trying to attract more and more clients with this amalgamation of technology. Although I would say these are the early days, and we are in the early stages of how these two will actually pan out together. The evolution is becoming more and more inevitable, and I think we can definitely expect some phenomenal advancements in the future. I think with that, I would be definitely wanting to thank Mr. Badar Khan for being part of this panel discussion. I think it's been a pleasure, and thank you so much for being there. Again, thank you for the wonderful audience who joined us today. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanjeev and Badar, for joining us. What an interesting fireside chat it was. Thank you once again for your valuable time at the World Cloud Show.
Thanks again. Take care.
Thank you.